We're no longer bound to our perimeter. I don't need to go back to my Exchange. I'm going to go to Exchange online. Am I going to connect to Photoshop, if I can say this, or like I'm going to go to Canva in the SaaS? Basically, we're right now connecting from anywhere to anywhere. So there is no kind of a star where I bring everything to one place where I can inspect. It's everything anywhere. The part that many times overlook is the entire idea of extensions, because I can do plugins and extension to my browser. The network security controls cannot protect me there. We're going back to endpoint security. So in this case, the enterprise browser become my endpoint security tool to understand what I can or cannot do and who is trying to steal data from myself. It's very easy to put a plugin that's going to help me to block ad blockers and stuff like that, but I don't really know what else this ad blocker taking from me. Start doing public speaking much earlier, because it will have to push me to a different level. I will have to structure my ideas. I will have to learn to become a better communicator. This will help me to communicate my ideas in a different language, but it also requires you to structure your ideas, to understand what motivates people, how is the consumer information, what's working for them. There's a lot of things coming there.
Today, we have the unique pleasure of interviewing a fellow podcast host, Evgeniy Kharam, Chief Strategy Officer at Discern Security and one of the voices behind the Security Architecture podcast. With over 25 years spanning hands-on security engineering to advising global enterprises, Evgeniy has a rare panoramic view of our industry that I'm excited to dive into. Welcome to the Be Fearless podcast, Evgeniy.
Thank you very much, and I love the name for the podcast.
I do too. I think it's great. I mean, I wish I could take credit for it, but I didn't. But yeah, I've liked the name as well. Well, let's start with a little bit about your background. I saw that you got into cybersecurity like in 1999. That's a long time ago. What was the cybersecurity landscape like then?
I have to be cautious here because I more got in like IT in 1999. I was actually in the Navy. So I got my first glimpse on the networking, Linux, Windows, servers, very small amount of cyber yet during this time. But I'm grateful to this time because I learned the basics. I learned about cables. I learned about networks. I learned about broadcast. I learned about what to do and what not to do. What's IP collisions, how to work with Linux, how to work with Windows. I learned DNS and DHCP and Active Directory. And then when I joined Checkpoint in 2004, I was already quite dangerous in the information I knew about network and IT in general. And this is where I dived in more to cyber. And from there was cyber, and a bit more about cyber.
Okay, I see. So I got into cybersecurity in 2003. Very similar. I actually was introduced to doing a contract for the U.S. Navy, and honestly, I thought I was building enterprise management systems. That's actually what I was doing at the time. And ITIL, I think it was Remedy or something, and it was Remedy. So I was building Remedy for ITIL and then Tivoli for enterprise management systems. And it was all, Solaris based, and we were managing Windows systems for the most part with this system. And I didn't know cyber at all at the time. And then all of a sudden they kind of came up to me and they were like, hey, this is great. System works great, but it's not secure. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then they started showing me like the DISA stigs and how to configure everything and what I should do and what I shouldn't do. And that's how I got into cybersecurity. It was a long time ago, but it was on the system side. It sounds like you came from the networking side.
And came from the networking side, and it was very interesting because I spent a number of years in Checkpoint as a QA analyst. So I basically I did firewall debugging. I learned all the protocols. I understand what does it mean on the security and the protocols level. And when I moved to Canada, Toronto, under my wrong assumption, I was thinking that everybody know how to debug a firewall. It's like, what do you mean? Just open a console and debug the firewall. People are like, are you nuts? What are you talking about? But what I learned very quickly is that while I knew how firewalls work in depth, really deep, I was lacking the basic administration of the firewalls because my rules were like 5 rules, 10 rules. But when I go to a customer, it's going to be 200, 4,000 rules.
Mm.
And then you realize that, wait a second, everybody blame the firewalls, like everything happening. Oh, you made a change yesterday. My SQL doesn't work right now. So you end up learning so much around the firewall, understanding the TCP/IP state of other devices that are not properly using the TCP/IP, not closing the state, for example. So it was very interesting on this part to dive in, and I very quickly learned about databases. I very quickly started learning about endpoint security, database security, WAF, SIEMs, and many other different things towards probably about 4 or 5 years of actively working, deploying, architecting, designing firewalls, move more to management. But then I ended up doing a very big project for one of the banks on DLP, and I moved from management to architecture. So I kind of back more to technical, and the idea of connecting the dots, the idea of connecting how vendors work together intrigued me a lot. So for me, it's a puzzle. Understand what does it mean? What's the optimal solution architecture? And there's a difference between architecture and solution architecture. And still, right now, every time we talk about vendors, my eyes like light up. Okay, how everything can work together.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting. You're kind of talking a little bit about what you were doing on the product side and how you were helping products get better from a QA perspective and understanding how the product worked. And then you kind of get into enterprises and you find out that the network is a layer of it, right? But how the applications work together is a bit more complicated, right? And then then of course, the business wants their applications to work, right? So you're getting a little bit more pressure probably with making sure your security programs and how it works kind of matches up to how you can let the applications work on the network. And then you said something about DLP as well. Now you're talking about trying to determine, what kind of loss of data you're having as well. So it's like we've done networks, we've gone to interoperability of applications, and now we're trying to. Were you doing DLP on the network or on the systems? Or
Everything.
Everything.
So pretty much the project was, how do we deploy DLP as a program with data categorization on endpoint, network, web, network monitoring, and discovery as well. So for me, it was an eye-opening on everything DLP related, so data leakage prevention for the people, and also on the different architectures and traffic manipulation, because traffic may be encrypted, may be decrypted.
Right.
It may be visible, maybe not visible. There is speed, there is productivity. And you mentioned something very important. The business wants the application to work. And in many cases, it's our responsibility to achieve the availability of the application in a secure way, as you mentioned when you did, to make sure it's secure. But also, what is the high availability? And how much money now we're going to even more interesting topics when you kind of mature is that, okay, I want everything to be secure, but what's the price? Do I put more money in security or availability or productivity? And there are some products. I'm going to mention the product. There was a product called Bromium. If people have been around for a long time,
Yep.
the product was amazing. It just, as a product, oh my god, amazing. As a product, as a tool for user experience, it was horrible. Like it was impossible to work with, and everybody realized that as a security concept, it was good, but as a day by day, the adoption will not going to go anywhere. Is the joke? If you want to be secure, unplug stuff on the internet. So it was almost the same. So when you go into enterprises and when you talking to enterprises, you need to make them secure and available, but you also need to understand, how do I build the high availability? Mm-hmm. Is the high availability going to be microseconds? Or it's going to be more, or we need to do it manually. So this is the part that was also very interesting for me on the network side. And it's definitely changed with cloud adoption. It's definitely changed when everything moved to HTTP and HTTPS, because now suddenly we move from variety of protocols to, honestly, 3-4 protocols.
Right.
DNS, HTTP to HTTPS, some FTP, I hope not. Of course, we have the BGP and some other SSH protocols, but as a regular user, as majority of the application, it's all web HTTP enabled, so it changed.
Yeah, it's all. If you look at the percentage of what protocols have been used over time, I think in late 2000s, or not late 2000s, sorry, late 1990s and early 2000s, the protocols would have been. You would have seen a lot of TCP/IP. You would have seen other protocols in the late 90s as well, not TCP/IP, more like NetBIOS and what was NetWare's ICX or something. I can't remember what the.
Yeah, I don't remember as well.
There were a lot of other kind of protocols that were there, and TCP/IP1, which is great. But the protocols that run on it, like SSH and Telnet, we don't see Telnet anymore. But I think that what's really changed is the amount that's HTTP, with including RESTful APIs and all those kinds of things, is a lot. And I think the other thing that's really changed is how we can inspect it. It used to be that we had our own proxy servers and we pushed things through, some sort of proxy server, whether it was Squid or some other, remember Blue Coats or whatever it is that you had. And we could actually inspect what was going on as it pushed through the proxy servers. And today, the protocols are still HTTP, HTTPS. However, there's a lot more encryption in the way, right? Because of how we're delivering, apps today, from the browser to the SaaS, and it's all Diffie-Hellman, which we can't just pin a certificate inside our firewalls or our IPSs anymore and inspect the traffic in that way. I think that's made defending in some ways easier because we have fewer protocols, but in a lot of ways harder because of how they're deployed today.
Because there's few things, if we can go down the rabbit hole, it's very interesting because you mentioned something interesting. People went to HTTP and HTTPS, but why? Because in the 2000s, everybody realized that people doing whatever they want. So let's close all the protocols and leave just port 80 open and 443 open. So it didn't take a long time for people to realize, if I want to get out, I don't want to use my own port. And if you look on Torrent, Skypes, and many other protocols and applications, they quickly realized to go to port 80. So what happened? I close everything, I leave port 80, but now everybody piggyback on port 18443. Boom, Palo Alto comes, we say we do application control. We're going to look inside port 80 and we're going to uncover all the applications. So you're absolutely right. The technology changed, people change the technology, everybody's adapted. Now we realize it's unsecure. We need to go HTTPS, not now. It's been probably already around 10 years, and probably 98% of the traffic in the internet is encrypted and should be encrypted as well. So now we need to do something else. We need to decrypt. But as you rightly say, it's very hard to be man in the middle because it could be TLS 1.3, it could be PIN certificate, it could be a variety of stuff. So if I can inspect right on the agent right before, then I may do much more. So there's a lot of nuances here. Definitely the bad guys can also use encryption as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you were saying, I think I like that people were piggybacking on HTTP. And I don't know if you remember, but I remember deploying Exchange servers back in the early 2000s. And one of the best things that came out for us was RCP over HTTPS. Right, that we could actually tunnel RCP. That made well, that wasn't RCP; it was something else as well. There's another protocol that the Exchange servers used that was also able to tunnel over HTTPS as well. That made deploying Outlook in like remote offices and in a compartment. I'm gonna say cloud ways. Before there was cloud, right? There was people that had their own data centers that were also doing multi-tenant kind of deployments, but we could then use that to deploy, Exchange and everything to multiple people over HTTPS, which made it so easy to install Outlook into a lot of different offices and stuff. I mean, the world's kind of shifted from the 2000s. What I wanted to go back and ask about was about Discern Security. Discern, you're the CSO at Discern, Chief Strategy Officer. I'd love to hear what you do, right? It's probably, it sounds like a great job. And then tell us a little bit about your work at Discern. What does Discern do and what's your work there?
Definitely. Definitely. So the way I describe the role is kind of whatever my CEO doesn't want to do, I'm doing. But in reality, he's responsible and go to market, responsible on technical partnership with vendors, partnership with VAR and MSSPs as well, understand marketing. So it's a quite variety of stuff. We're still a small company. And I'll explain what we do. You understand why I'm there. So when I still was with Horjovic Group, I did a lot of workshops for enterprise customers. What does it mean? We'll come to a large customer and we help them to elevate their cybersecurity program to the next level. We'll ask about the tools, we'll ask about the vendors, about the architecture, about the risk. And some questions I would like to ask will be like, hey, how do you know your endpoint security deployed everywhere? um, because it's hard to answer. We're no longer being in one flat network. I cannot just scan the network and understand what's happening. There's many BYOD devices. There's many devices that come from everywhere. We no longer give people a laptop with everything deployed like a golden image. So I need to push all the applications. So it's very, very hard. And at the same time, when you mentioned about the podcast, the reason we started the podcast with Dimitri, Security Architecture Podcast, is because I'll go and sell a tool to a customer, and I'll come 6 months after, and the tool will be deployed half or 20%, or even not even deployed. So shelfware or security theater, as Bruce Schneier like to say this. So this is what Discern fix. Discern connect over API to all the security tools, almost like a management layer,
Right.
and first tell you all the things you're doing in the tool. If it's an EDR, if it's a SaaS vulnerability manager, that look on all the amazing features you're not using. And right now, I'm sure SquareX is pushing updates every week. There's always something, some new nuggets coming out after the SquareX. If you take it 15 years ago, McAfee and Symantec will push an update every 3 months.
That's right.
So you as an end user, just way you're gonna go and understand every new feature and how to use it. So with Discern, we connect to all the tools, we understand everything new, we digest them based on risk and what's applicable. We'll tell the people, hey, this is what you should be doing on these particular tools. In the same time, because we have all the assets, we digest the assets, manipulate the assets, and tell you, and by the way, let's speak about Square. You want Square X to be installed everywhere at the customer. We will tell you, here's all the devices that don't have Square X. How would we know? Because we understand what's reporting to SquareX, what's connected to Microsoft, what is the EDR telling us, what's the vulnerability management tell us, and we do the duplication and tell. So we're building from the ground up with all the information, and then all the way to help you with risk controls, assessment like SOC 2, NIST, MITRE as well, and build reporting. So very, very quick elevator pitch about the company.
Yeah. So I definitely feel like one of the biggest problems I've had as a CISO has been not knowing what the state of my program was, right? And again, my experience is probably like many CISOs, where we have a new anti-malware product and we're trying to push it out because we need to get PCI DSS compliant for whatever reason. Many reasons, right? So we're pushing that out, and when we do our assessment, we inevitably find that we don't have anti-malware everywhere that we wanted it to be, right? And then we do what we need to do so that we can get 100% pushing out anti-malware protection everywhere, and then we go around to our next PCI DSS cycle, and again, it's not in control anymore. It's back to like 60% or 70%. And it's like trying to stay on top of the state of your different tools that you're deploying everywhere is, I think, one of the more frustrating problems for CISOs.
But it's not just that, and you're absolutely right, is first of all, how do you know it's not even deployed? Maybe you forgot about the network for a variety of reasons. We are human, so we need multiple indications of the information to understand what are we missing. Second, it's not just about being compliant to PCI or to SOC, because SOC 2, for example, says you need to have an antivirus.
Yep.
Great, I have an antivirus, but devil in the details. Is it deployed everywhere? How do you know it's everywhere? So
and is it the right engine? Is it the right
version? Is it N-1, N-2?
That's
so
right.
I always tell people we have external compliances, but ideally You want to have your own measurement on what do you want. And this could be, I'm okay with n-1 or n-2 for my firewall, for my endpoint, but I want it to be everywhere. So you want to set your own goals and achieve these goals for yourself, because at the end of the day, if you're complying to PCI and get hacked, nobody will care. You still have a
Well,
problem.
definitely, the PCI people will care.
My bad. Yes, I mean, you will not gonna say I'm PCI compliant, but I got hacked.
No,
It's not
I
gonna
absolutely
happen.
agree. I think it's like having been in those incident responses where my PCI environment was compromised, and then having to deal with PCI, and having the compliance and having been compliant. That's a good place to be with respect to that. But it still doesn't stop you from all of the downstream problems that you have from it. Whether you were compliant or not compliant doesn't really matter. That's just kind of a legal check mark, right? But you still have to deal with the consequences of actually having a hack, whether that's informing your customers that you've been hacked, dealing with the consequences and with regulators, all the lawyers and everything else. There's lots of downstream consequences to, again, being compliant's good, right? It may save you some things, but you still have problems, and it's way better to be secure than compliant, right? And knowing what your state is, and being able to make a decision about whether the push to get to 100% deployment of everything, is it worth it, right? With respect to what your actual goals are from your security program, right? So it depends. You may be willing to take I can find an attacker within 24 hours on my network. That's a much better posture than 280 days or being told by the FBI that you're hacked, right? So,
Seeing defense in depth, the entire idea of MITRE ATT&CK frame, or even NIST on this part, on the detect, respond, identify, it's a great framework in general. No, we're not relying on one part. There's a lot of this conversations that we as defenders need to be right all the time, and the bad guys need to be right one time. So depend who you ask, because if you build your infrastructure correctly, they may able to penetrate, but they may able not go anywhere. Or let's case worst case scenario, majority of the time, the bad guys they were able to get anywhere they want, and now they have the files or the data they want to get out. What if you don't get all the data? No, what if the dog is there and they cannot just leave? Did we Are we good? Are we bad? Are we happy? I think we're happy. Yeah, we messed up, but we didn't cause a big problem. So back to DLP, what if our data security is really good and we were able to stop the bad guys?
yep.
There's still a lot of stuff to fix to not let them in next time, but at least we achieve something.
Absolutely. So, you've worked across different sides of the industry. You've been on the vendor side. You were at an MSP. You were saying you were at Herjavec Group, right?
Yes.
And I guess that's where you were at the MSP work, and you were talking to your customers and enterprise side and doing assessments. And now you're a CSO, and you're a podcast host. What are some of the biggest security challenges enterprise face today? And do you think it's changed in the past decade?
It's changed in the past decade. It's changed with COVID. One, the moment COVID came, everybody moved to work from home. So my attack surface just moved from a needle to kind of deserts, because it became so big. So this is one. Two, the last decade, how many SaaS tools are right now? SaaS applications. We're no longer bound to our perimeter. I don't need to go back to my exchange. I'm going to go to exchange online. Am I going to connect to Photoshop, if I can say this, or like I'm going to go to Canva in the SaaS, and many other options. Basically, we're right now connecting from anywhere to anywhere. So there is no kind of a star when I bring everything to one place where I can inspect. It's everything everywhere. This is one. Two, because of SaaS, we now have a lot of APIs that I need to secure. I have a lot of non-human identities I need to secure. I cannot just create rules back to network based on here is your IP and source. I have to create rules based on John Evgeniy groups, but probably also by the devices you're coming from. One of the reasons I like the idea of enterprise browsers, for example, because I can bound and say you can only connect from it from this browser. And if you don't have this browser, I'm not allowed you to get in. So there's a lot of things happen from kind of being static from if then that to if then maybe we can do something with you. So it's definitely move fast. And I don't even want to talk about AI and LLMs right now because it's a huge can of worm of the perspective what data can leave my environment. We briefly mentioned about encryption. We briefly mentioned about DLP. So if I'm a developer right now, or even an HR person, a financial person, and I want to go and mess with ChatGPT with the company data, can I stop it? Or I maybe have a data or LLM inside my company, like a blast one, a good kosher one, that I can go play with it. I still don't know when I'm playing with this LLM, I may be not going to make harm to my data, but I may find the data in this LLM that I'm not supposed to see. So there's definitely a lot of different parts. So I will say to summarize, because I kind of went on a tangent here, is the unknown part. The enterprises are definitely need to battle what they don't understand is happening. And they don't know what's going to hit them tomorrow that we didn't know exist. Log4j, for example, and many other examples like that. So for this, I always tell people we have to go back to the basics. No, we don't need to buy the most sexiest tool ever. We need to get basic to access, provisioning of identities, onboarding, offboarding, understanding. Like I would love to say data security DLP, but to get to DLP, you need to have a lot of stuff done first. Before we even go there, we need to understand our assets. Literally 2 days ago, I was presenting about how do we protect what we don't know, basically third-party management and other things. I need to have an inventory. If I have many different vendors, I need to understand which vendor has access to my data on who will have the biggest impact. So we're coming back to tabletop exercise. We're coming back to testing DR scenarios for some of the things to understand what's the impact.
Right. So, I mean, I think, I think I see the changes in very much the same way that you see them. One thing, I think 10 years ago, it was very common for us to we worked at offices, we had corporate offices, and we had data centers. And even though the cloud existed, right, a lot of enterprises weren't pushing into the cloud like we push into the cloud today. And IT actually had exchange engineers, AD engineers, network engineers. They had all of this, IT expertise that was in-house, right? And they could always augment with consultants and stuff as well. But in the industry, in places where I worked, we had all of these different kinds of engineers, and we had our own data centers. We had our own corporate offices. This is big finance. This is military environments, and tech companies that I worked for. We had our own data centers, and then there was this kind of massive push to the cloud, right? And a lot of businesses started going to the cloud, and a lot of the industries that I worked in were slow to adopt the cloud, right? So. But what I see today is that enterprise IT doesn't really run their own IT. It's mostly them using SaaS vendors, like you were saying, M365. You don't have your own Exchange servers anymore. You don't have your own AD servers. You have an M365 with a E3 license or an E5 license, and now you have Exchange and your AD and your tools all kind of inside this big license that you can just get. But you're not managing it anymore. And so you were saying earlier about Discern and being able to see what new feature sets and stuff are coming out. I think that's one of the frustrating things for me is that a lot of new features just come out on SaaS products, and then they may impact my security, but how do I know when those things are happening, right? When those new features are coming out. And then because of that, because IT isn't I think the vendors definitely saw that they were getting a lot of value out of having SaaS products. So you have even vendors like SAP who are pushing their products, pushing you into the cloud instead of having it in your own data centers. And then we also shifted from proprietary applications and protocols that were fat apps that were dealing with SAP backends, right? Maybe Oracle database protocols or whatever to make it work. We've kind of gone from that to RESTful APIs and web browsers as our main interface to deploying apps, right? I mean, so many apps are deployed with a web interface today than we did in 10 years ago. That wasn't the case. So it's a completely different kind of environment, and I think that has a lot to do with like one of the reasons why I'm so interested in browser security. And you were mentioning enterprise browsers as well. Is that I think that we both think that browser security remains largely overlooked in organizations. I think they believe that EDRs and SWGs, secure web gateways, that these tools are going to protect them, right? That their proxy servers are going to protect them. They're going to, the SASE tools and stuff that they have in place. From your architectural perspective, do you see those gaps as well? Like those browser native threats that are, we already know about phishing. We already know about malicious extensions and OAuth scopes, because that's a new thing that we didn't have 10 years ago was OAuth scopes that we were having to manage as well. From an architectural perspective, what do you see the biggest gaps there are?
Well, if we're talking about corporate security, I like to differentiate between stuff.
Okay.
Because when we're talking about a company, we're talking about insurance company, for example.
Sure.
An insurance company will be different than a marketing company, because marketing company will have almost zero infrastructure and they're not going to develop anything. I'm not saying good or bad; it's just different. But the insurance, because their main business is something else. But the insurance company going to have a corporate security. They're going to have their product, whatever the product they sell. So they're going to have a product. They're going to have a data center, maybe in the cloud. They will need to do SaaS, DAST, WAF, DDoS, and whatever there to protect the application. Okay. Now, with the corporate environment, it's going to be similar to the marketing company, because they're going to be users, going to be browsing the internet, doing the work, understanding how to work with other people, answering calls. And they're the people that will be integrating the browsers, you can say this, integrating, or basically incorporating the idea of the modern attack, because they're going to go through different websites and they're going to log in and do different informations. And as you mentioned, majority of the time we spend in the browsers. I probably spend 95% in the browser, beside few tools like Outlook and maybe Photoshop or Canva or something else that had a fat client. All my other work done in the browser. So if I can protect what I can do in the browser, if I can have my DLP, if I can have my antiviruses, basically what I'm downloading and what I'm doing, the URLs as well, then why not? It's just from a logic perspective. Beside this, back to defense in depth, if I can say you can only connect to me from this particular browser, it's important. Now, the part that many times overlook is the entire idea of extensions, because I can do plugins and extension to my browser, and the network security controls cannot protect me there. We're going back to endpoint security. So in this case, the enterprise browser become my endpoint security tool to understand what I can or cannot do and who is trying to steal data from myself. It's very easy to put a plugin that's going to help me to block ad blockers and stuff like that, but I don't really know what else this ad blocker taking from me.
Absolutely. If it's free, you're probably the product, so it's probably taking some information from you. But again, kind of going back to that point, right? Is that the way that we deploy applications today in a browser, right? In SaaS, right? Is EDRs aren't able to see what's in my clipboard as I copy something from my confidential data store in OneDrive and then paste it into another app. Let's say my personal Gmail. I can't. It's hard for an EDR tool or your network tools to differentiate between this is a good Gmail and this is a bad Gmail, or this is a good OneDrive, or this is a bad OneDrive. I mean, it's from a
100%.
network perspective, it all looks like OneDrive. It all looks like Gmail. So if you're going to block everything, you have to block everything.
Not just one. We're talking about corporate
Yep.
or personal. So back in the days when Cosby just started, like how do I differentiate between corporate Dropbox and personal Dropbox? Personal Gmail, corporate Gmail, personal ChatGPT, corporate ChatGPT, and there is many such examples on. You're absolutely right. The devil in the details,
Absolutely. And then, kind of going back to the SaaS stuff and shadow SaaS in particular, and then again, it's like kind of like it's a really risky kind of points of view here. Is that, I know that in my own audit that I did for our SaaS applications, we ended up figuring out that we had like 200 apps that were inside of our conditional access policies and protected by SSO and our credentials, right? About 200 something, 238, something like that. And I remember the guy telling me, the guy who was doing the audit and was giving me the report, he's like, yeah, it's pretty good. You have about 30% of your environment that's protected. What I didn't have was the other 600 SaaS apps that my users were using. They weren't protected by it, and they were using their own.
What do we say? Everyone with a credit card is the CIO of the company,
Yeah, that's a good one. Because, but again, it's like going back to the DLP example, is that if you don't know what's being used in your environment, right? If you don't know where people are putting their data, putting their business, their intellectual property, the business data in, because I mean, when it's all said and done, users are wanting to do their job. The fact that if they have a credit card, great, but there's so many apps that are just free that for one person it's free, and maybe they're not supposed to be using it that way if they're in a corporate environment, but they do. And it makes it really kind of difficult to kind of manage all that stuff if you're trying to do it with EDR, SWG, SASE tools, that kind of network protocols, and do that kind of stuff. From a risk management point of view, how would you kind of tackle that? Do you know what I mean? It's like, there's a lot of shadow SaaS.
Let's try to dissect this. We're kind of coming back to assets. So we need to understand first what is sanctioned and unsanctioned applications in my company. So this is the entire domain of, I think it's called EPM, endpoint, no, not EPM, forgot about the name. But let's go back to the basic, Bit9. Remember application whitelisting? That was later acquired by Carbon Black and then VMware. Right now, there are still companies doing application whitelisting. And in a way, where I'm going with this, I'm not telling you go and deploy EDR application whitelisting, but one of the first steps was to understand what I'm even supposed to be running in the company. People say, oh my God, I'm never able to do it. But no, you can. You can say everything by Google I'm trusting, for example, or Microsoft I'm trusting. I can create and understand what people can do. So large enterprises, so you in a big company, they almost have like a package. If you need an application, here's the corporate store, go and install it. If you don't need an application, there's a special request. You need to explain what to go with this. But we're talking about installing application on your laptop. As you mentioned, we don't need to install anything because I can go to the web and just log into it. So we need to switch this part to understand, okay, what are my sanctioned SaaS applications? Is this Adobe? Is this some kind of CRM? Is this some kind of a different tool? I can get this information. I can then start manipulating and understanding to allow or disallow access using the browser, for example, or in some cases, if you have secure web gateway, maybe secure web gateway as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what you're saying is that we have to have some sort of discovery process. You have to be able to figure out what assets people are using, whether they're sanctioned or not sanctioned. But the first part of it is just understanding your use cases, right? And then finding out from the users why they're doing what they're doing, and then kind of figure out like how do you then start to control that access. And again, I think that the for me, being the field CISO at SquareX now, I think that the right way is some capability that allows you to see what's going on in the browser. Of course, I would tell you go talk to SquareX, but you got to see what's going on in the browser, being able to determine what apps people are going to, how they're logging in, what scopes
Data.
they're using,
Yeah.
get the
And
data,
what data they're uploading.
then figure out how you're going to start putting controls in place. And hopefully your tooling also has that capability of put controls in place so that you can do it just like we were doing it back in the day with fat apps. Right? We used to do the exact same thing with fat apps where we can say, these are OK extensions, these are OK OS apps, these are sanctioned SaaS apps, and get that under control. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I wanted to talk a little bit about your podcasting experiences. You run a show under the security architecture umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
What gap were you trying to fill in today's cybersecurity conversations with this approach that you're taking, this multifaceted approach to security architecture?
Very simple. When a customer wants to buy a product, instead of going to a vendor, I want them to go to the architecture podcast, watch what Dimitri did, because for every security web gateway, enterprise browser, ZTNA, application security, they will able to understand the questions they should ask the vendors first, and the questions they didn't know they're supposed to ask. Because the last things I want to have is to people to buy a technology and then realize it's not going to work in the environment because they forgot to ask about integration, design, and architecture.
I love it because I think that one of the gaps, especially in folks that have Windows environments and using Microsoft technologies, you think that as long as you're all on Windows, you probably can get a pretty good suite of things going for you. But once you kind of delve into the cloud, right, Linux, Macintosh, or other kinds of operating systems, your ability, like VMware, is surprisingly unprotected. Even what came out like VMware ESX came out like in 2006 or something like that, and it's been forever, and it still doesn't have any kind of real protection on the devices on the hypervisor. And but you kind of understand like what the technology is able to do, how it fits into your defensive strategies, and then is this vendor going to work for you, and how, if it is going to work, how is it going to work? I think those are really good points. You've also interviewed a lot of security entrepreneurs. Is there a common thread that you see among founders who successfully built security companies?
So this is the other show called Cyber Inspiration that's come under the umbrella of security architecture, where I'm interviewing more on the business part, less security. What was the idea behind starting the podcast? Starting the company, and what the steps they did. So the common part is people really understand there's always going to be unknown parts in the company, and they need to accept they're going to be the unknown. You need to respect to be comfortable in the unknown. They also understand that part of the work is to able to recharge and able to figure out what they can do. So I'm not talking about work-life balance. I'm not going to go there, but they have a mechanism to deal with problems. This could be workout, this could be friends, swimming, singing, but they have a mechanism to get back to be fully charged, to be able to do what they do. This is 2. 3 is clear understanding that sales is number 1. So they need to understand how to sell. And the interesting mechanism happening depending on your maturity level is how do you transition from a founder lead sales to a team? And when do you do this? Because this moment is very critical. Because if you're doing it too early, you may be too early. If you do this too late, it's going to be very hard for you to scale. So the moment when you need to scale and start going faster.
Very interesting advice. Very interesting advice. Because I think that you're right. I think just being in a startup, this is one of the first startups that I've worked in, SquareX. And I think it is one of the challenges is how do you go from founder-led sales to to having a sales organization? And I think it's a very interesting dynamic. I mean, having been a CSO and had budgets, and I've dealt with a lot of salespeople, but as a buyer, seeing it from the other side is definitely a different experience for me. And then you have another series, the Launchpad series, that focuses on helping vendors showcase their architecture.
It's a side of this because we have a seasons, and then people came over and asked, I want to have my XYZ. It's like, we don't have a season for you. So basically, it's the side offering where people can come and show whatever they want to show. With the seasons, it's a very structured. We're asking people the same questions. With Launchpad, is we're working together on what questions we want to ask, but they're still focused on design and security.
Cool.
So it's good architecture.
Yeah. Is there any mistakes that you see that is common amongst them, or?
Depend on where they're trying to sell. If they're trying to sell to enterprises, they forget about all the check and balance that the enterprises want. Are you SOC 2 compliant? Are you have the data in the right location? Can you have your support team not to see what's happening inside my tenant? So this is on the enterprise level. On the other mistakes is trying to be everything. I am good for small company, medium company, enterprise, MSSP, VAR, you name it. So like, no, you cannot do everything well, or you need to focus on something better, or you cookie cutter, or you're very, very adaptable.
Right. I agree too. I agree with that as well. I think that enterprise sales is definitely different than selling to a small or medium business. The level of pain that as an enterprise, being an enterprise and being a buyer, the procurement and legal indemnities and what jurisdiction that we're going to have a contract in, and all the data processing addendums, all these kinds of things become big issues in enterprise sales that take a long time and a lot of effort to get through it. And so you want to make sure that you can get through the process, and then that you're making enough money to cover all that effort that you have to do to get into a sale. So, but it's a different mindset. I'm gonna switch to closing. Okay, you're also the author of the book Architecting Success: The Art of Soft Skills and Technical Sales. Why did you decide to write that book?
You have to invite me again for the show. It's a long topic. But very, very, very quickly. Oh my God, many vendors, when I was in the Horjoy group, came in and say, hi, I'm a salesperson. Please watch my presentation. And then the engineer will say, hi, I'm an engineer. Can you watch my demo? And you've been on the other side. And nobody asking, almost nobody, hey, Mr. Customer, what you would like to see? What is the better way to spend the time? This is one part. Second part, definitely during COVID, we saw a big shift to working over Zooms, Teams, and Googles. So we definitely have a problem to connect to people remotely because we're not in the same space. People have multiple screens. So can I do something to connect to David quicker? Because if I believe that if I cannot connect to David quicker in the first minute or two, he will not care about my product because he will be focusing on many different screens. Because it's not just, we don't have the full attention. This is one part. Second part is the entire idea of communication and what I learned from doing a podcast about how to present that better. And honestly enough, the problem is that hard to solve is how technical people can present their ideas in the ways that other people can understand them. This could be simplification. This could be some kind of examples or metaphors.
Yeah, I think some of what you said really kind of rang true to me as a buyer. I mean, I've been in many sales presentations where the conversation was more about the product and the company than it was about ever finding out what problems I had or even trying to connect to me in any ways. And I found myself many times tuning out and or actually just getting up and leaving the conversation and just leave my head of security engineering or something in the room, and just, and then, have someone else kind of tell me what's going on. But I really would like you said, someone to think about what it is that I'm actually going to, what my problems actually are, and then kind of say, hey, is this something you can help me with? Because I think it's a very valuable, it's a valuable opportunity that you probably don't want to mess up when you get into conversations. And I mean, I've had technical people argue with me about what my problem is. It's just crazy to me.
It is.
But anyways, if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice about building a career in this field, what would it be?
It will be very simple. Start doing public speaking much, much earlier.
Okay. Very good. Very good. And why is that?
Because it will have to push me to a different level. I will have to structure my ideas. I will have to learn to become a better communicator. This will help me to communicate my ideas in a different language. And fear is number two fear after death in general, a phobia. So overcoming this part will overcome other problems as well, but it also requires you to structure your ideas, to understand what motivates people, how they consume information, what's working for them. There's a lot of things coming there. And the other one is brand. At the end of the day, we have a company brand. We have our own brand as well that we need to carry. And this is important because also the moment you go on a podcast, you realize that it's not just between you and me. Your mom, your dad, your spouse, everybody else will listen to it. So you cannot just say whatever you want and think it's true. You need to think what do you want to share, what you don't want to share, and you want to do your fact checking that you make sure you're talking about something that it makes sense. We do mistakes from time to time, but it does require you to up your game by a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think every time I start putting stuff on paper or start getting my slides together, the structure of it really comes together, right? And being able to communicate very clearly, like what your three main things are that you want people to take away, and getting all that stuff together, I think that makes it a much better presentation, right? And it's your likelihood of influencing is going to be better as well. So good advice.
Thank you.
Evgeniy, I've really enjoyed having you on the show, and thank you for your time.
Thank you as well. It was a pleasure.